When we put the electricity in the farm, you're allowed to do it when I was young. You could run your own posts over the land and put the electricity in largely by do it yourself. And when we did it, my mother took the 9 oil lamps that she had lived with all her married life and stuck them in the attic. You see, she had cleaned those every morning. It's no good running oil lamps unless you keep them perfectly clean. So every morning they'd be carried out of the room, down to the back scullery, and cleaned absolutely perfectly and put back. They were that sort of woman. So she very gladly put them in the attic, and when we left that farm, we left them there, and 9 of them were blue Bristol glass. 7 of the 8 were blue Bristol glass. I've often wondered since what antique dealer sold them into which American mansion. You see, you can tell you're getting old when the junk of your youth becomes the collector's pieces of the present. I went up to see my son when he was at Cambridge. I had to take him out to dinner, and all his friends. It's always like that. He said to me, can we go to this new restaurant they've opened in an old mews at the back of Cambridge? It's called The Stable. It's very picturesque, he said. And I walked in there, and the whole of this place was decorated with the stuff that we chucked in the corner of the stable when we bought the first tractor. The fact of the matter is that there is a great collector's craze for this stuff. And when there's a collector's craze, there's always a clever man who writes a book about it. Some of the books are full of a load of rubbish. And one of the reasons why they're not understood is all this stuff is terribly local. People lived in 15-mile radius. They dealt with one blacksmith who made things for them. And in the other side of the county, the tools would be different. And quite often, if you find a thing in the wrong place, you can't find out what it is. For instance, this shovel turned up on the borders of Hampshire and Dorset. The beautiful leaf-shaped shovel of very thin metal. It's got a hole bored in it there. And we wondered what it is. One man said to me, that's a steam engine shovel. Well, I knew it wasn't a steam engine shovel because that's a steam engine shovel, and I've used one. And another person said, it's a malt shovel for the barley, that's why it's so thin. And I said, no, those were always made of wood. And we couldn't find out anything about it until we finally took it to a retired Yorkshire miner who was living in a caravan, and he told us that we should have spotted in the beginning that that hole is at the point of balance. Every miner had 2 shovels. This, a dust shovel, an ordinary shovel, and a pick. And there was holes in the 2 shovels and holes in the handle of the pick, and when he came off work, he put shackle through it and a padlock and hung it on the his own number on the rack so nobody else could nick his tools. But anyway, the collecting goes on, and people always rush to buy these things. Recently, a friend of mine who's a shepherd was made redundant. Very sad. His father and his grandfather were shepherd. He'd been 25, 30 years on the same place, and the estate decided to go over to corn, and so he was made redundant. And for 25 years, everything that had been found in a shed or ploughed up, he had chucked in a shed. And so when this sad time came in his life, he opened a shed and spread them in the field for a sale. It was very sad, and the Lord wept for him, and did he weep. I have never seen such rain in my life, and I thought, this won't be much of a sale. Nobody will come today. I better go along and try and help him. So I went, and I saw all this stuff that he'd been putting in. That, for instance, that's the old cane sieve that we used to use for feeding the heavy horses. You could shake that, you see, and the dust out of the chaff and the corn fell out through the grain, through the cane at the bottom, and then you could feed the horses nice clean grub. And it's very, very light. Every carter in England had 3 or 4 of those, and yet you'd find it difficult to find one nowadays. And there is the wooden shovel I was talking about for the malt. In the old malt house, every shovel was carved out of wood like that, so you could shovel grain with it without damaging. But that one's spoiled, you notice, because somebody has put a metal along the broken edge of it. So, although I'm sure it'll sell very well, you couldn't actually use that for its original purpose now, because it was made of wood, because wood was what's needed to handle the swelling grain in the malt house. And there's something I never found. All my life, when I was young, my mother ironed with flat irons, but I've never seen that chimney piece specially made for keeping iron hot. Isn't that beautiful? He got that out of some old cottage that fell down and put it in his shed. And there's the front of the old bread oven. They built the brick oven in the ingle nook, and all they bought was the cast iron door. That went on the front. That, I think, is a particularly beautiful one. Had to be very nice if somebody was doing up an inglenook cottage. And I wonder if you know what those are. Well, they're the drainage scoops. Every winter we went draining. We dug long, narrow trenches with a draining spade, and then we had to take the crumb out of the bottom before you put down the clay draining tiles. And those were the drainage scoops that were made just for that job. I wonder what somebody says in the book about those. I'm glad to say he's kept a good deal of small stuff that he can keep in the house wherever he goes. There's a fine collection of forks here, but that one is an elegant one, isn't it? That is for passing up the bundles of reed to a thatcher when he's up on the roof. I've seen lots of those broken, but I haven't seen one all in one piece before. And a load of horse bits, which existed in an enormous variety for different purposes. There's a coach bit, there's a hunting curb bit. That is another curb bit, I think. That's a two-ring driving snaffle. That's the famous army bit, the universal reversible, which was available so huge numbers after the war. There's a mouthing bit for teaching young, and there's a pelham bit. And there's a series of horseshoes of a sort which have caused a great deal of debate among the collectors and the book writers. And that's a cauldron, you see. The only way we got hot water was from the copper. But with that you could stand it on the kitchen range on a day when there was a lot of things to be done and hot water was going to be needed, and it would produce a supply of hot water. That's a plate metal one, actually. The best of them were cast iron. That's a very good one. That's a cast iron one, but unfortunately the lid's gone. Still, I guess you could find a saucepan lid that would fit it. And this is reminiscent of the days when we kept the pig in a sty. That's a potato masher. You stood it on half a barrel. You boiled the potatoes into copper. You put them in there, sprinkled a handful of meal over them, and ground up the pig's potatoes with that machine. Real cottager's tool, that was. And this is terribly interesting. This is the old heavy iron wheel from a furrow press plough that turned the furrow over and pressed it hard over the buried grass, except that when you pick it up it doesn't weigh anything. It's actually the wooden pattern that was made in the local foundry from which the furrow press wheels were cast. This dates long before we changed over from pounds to kilograms, when we didn't even get as far as pounds because we bought things in bushels. A bushel of potato or a bushel of wheat seed. And those are bushel measures, and a bushel, incidentally, was 8 gallons. And that is the hardest tool there is to use, the hay knife. We cut the hay out of the settled hay ricks with blocks with those. Now they're on pub walls. As far as I'm concerned, they can stay there. And these are probably the oldest things here. They're wooden milking buckets. I've seen iron milking buttons on that pattern, but I haven't seen wooden milking buttons on pattern. I think more than 2 or 3 times in my life. You can see them in the old George Morland pictures of country life. The lady who bought those asked me what they were. And here's Laurie the shepherd putting a brave face on it as the rain pours down. But indeed, a lot of people have turned up. There's a great appetite for buying these things among people, even though they don't know what they are. I said to the lady who didn't know what the milking buckets were, why did you buy them? She said, well, my husband and I have got a museum. Well, that's great. She can put a lot of things in the museum without knowing what they are.
Do I hear £5, 6, 10, £10?
And so, as I say, it's the rubbish of your youth which becomes the collecting pieces of today, and that's how you know when you're growing old. I got quite a lot of things lying around this shed from a long life that started 2 miles from a made-up road. So we'll play a little quiz game particularly with those people who write the books about old country objects. Some of the books are magnificent, but we'll see. Let's start with the easy things. That is a tool which is still used, or rather not a tool, it's a jig. A tool does a job, a jig holds something still while the tool does a job. And this is a saddler's clamp. It was used between the knees, you see. Like there, that's right. Put it there for the moment. And when he wants to sew, and you can see this done in the saddlers still today, put the leather in there. Now if he were sewing together those two, for instance, in order to make a double trace for pony harness, what he would do is he'd take his awl, you've heard of cobbler's awls, and push it through like that, and then he'd take the two ends of his wax thread, he didn't bother with needles mostly, and he just put them through from opposite side and pull them tight, and then it all went through again, and the next stitch, and so on, all the way up. He'd probably use a pricker, a wheel, to mark his stitches before he started. So that's an easy one, because it's still in existence today. Here's something that's definitely not in existence today, and probably was in existence over 100 years ago. It's made of ivory. And just as a clue, I can tell you it probably travelled inside somebody's top hat, because it's a stethoscope. In the old days, doctors had little fine stethoscopes like this, and in my mother's day they still did carry them inside their top hats, but this is a much heftier one, and it's not a doctor's one. It's a vet stethoscope. And I'm sure he carried it in his hat too, perhaps in olden days, but when he came to use it, he wasn't going to listen to a nice bare chest like a human doctor does. He had to listen to a hairy chest, so he took his silk handkerchief and he put it over the horse's chest like that, and then he listened like that, and the silk handkerchief got rid of the rustle of the air, and he listened to the horse's heartbeat. So that was that. This, well, this had two uses because it was designed for one use and converted by sportsmen to another. It's a silver marrow spoon. It comes from the days of great big beef joints, and when people, among other things, used to eat great big marrow bones, and they loved the marrow particularly, so they had a spoon made that shape. They could push inside the big marrow bone and get the marrow out to eat it like that. Very delicious too. And the fly fishermen, by the time that was established and they started to study exactly what flies ate, started to use the marrow spoon, push down a trout's throat and get out his stomach contents like that. And then he could swim away unharmed, actually. And then you could put a little bit of water in there and stir it up, and you could study all the insects which the trout had been eating and make up your mind what sort of a fly you ought to fish with him for. Fish for him with. Now that is likely to fool a few people because it looks exactly like something else. It looks exactly like those heavy wooden clogs that went on the end of the horse's halter when it was in the stable. You pushed the halter rope through a ring, and then you pushed it through the clog and tied a knot on the end, and it worked up and down like that and kept the rope tight so the horse couldn't put his foot over. But this is exactly like it, but a bit smaller, and it is not made of wood, it's made of stone. And this was from a poacher's net, a salmon poacher's net. They used to have a big net they dragged across the river, and they carved these out. They really took this job seriously, poaching. They carved these out of stone, and they put one of these on every mesh, and then when the man on each bank, they dragged the net up the river, and they ran beautifully along the bottom of the river like that. So that is the weight from a salmon poacher's net. And there is a tool which you would be willing to bet was some kind of a tin opener, which it is not. It's got a spike there, it's got a hooked blade there which is sharpened, and another hooked blade there which is sharpened. And this particular one came from a cooperage where they made the wooden barrels for beer before they put beer in metal barrels. And the head cooper used to mark them with their numbers, and he did it like this, you see. He could mark straight lines like that, or if he put that in there like that and use the other blade, he could do half circles. At least he could if I sharpened it properly. Now with two circles you could make an 8, and with one circle and a half circle you make a 6 or a 9, and with two half circles you'd make a 3, and so you could, in the hard oak of the barrel top, you could put any number you liked. And indeed with that one there he could put 4x if he wanted to. These were also used in the days when they built timber-framed houses, and no doubt even timber-framed churches and cathedrals, when all the oak frame of the house was got ready on the ground, mortise and tenon, and the head builder would mark things with that, with their numbers, so the whole house could be assembled, prefab, so to speak, when they put it together. So that's what that is. And this is not what it seems. This, I always thought, was my grandfather's tobacco jar, pewter. And indeed he used it as his tobacco jar. It's one of the few of his possessions. He was born in 1830, incidentally. And I think he inherited it. And I always thought it was his tobacco jar until an expert put me right. It's got a weight in it, you see. Rather pretty weight, which exactly fits the inside of the jar, which I thought was meant to hold the tobacco down. But I was told, I think quite authoritatively, in fact this was a tinder box. What happened was they kept the tinder, which was used in the old days of flint and steel, in there. Now if you put the tow, the fluffed up stuff that was used to pick up a flame from the flint and steel in there, it would all bunch out. So the weight existed in order they could put plenty in and keep putting it in, put the weight on top. So they keep a good store of tinder about on the mantelpiece above the fire. And there's a clue to how old it is, because that is undoubtedly the Waterloo Lion. A lion of very much that heraldic design stands in full figure on the site of the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium, and you'll see them on pubs and you'll see them on all sorts of things all over things. And this was the Waterloo Lion, and there was a great craze for 5 or 10 years after the Battle of Waterloo, that is to say from 1850 to 1825, for using the Waterloo Lion, just as nowadays they might use a picture of Princess Diana or something. And so undoubtedly he must have inherited it, because it would have been just before his time. Now, a heavy weight which runs up and down a square spike, and a mechanism to hold it at the top, and here a tube which exactly fits a shotgun cartridge. So you drove that into the ground, you put a shotgun cartridge in there, and then on top of it you put that, which is a shaped piece of metal that's got a firing pin in the middle of it. Can you see? Yes, you can. You put that on there like that, and then you drove that into the ground, and you put a thin, invisible thread running across the ride in the pheasant wood like that, and anybody who came at night stumbled against it and fired the gun off and woke up the keeper. Now, this was given to me by an old gentleman who was 90 when he did so. It is a broom maker's handle knife. This old gentleman belonged to a series of families in the woods of northern Hampshire where for centuries the trade had been broom making. And they put the hazel sticks in a break as an arrangement thing, and they shaped the handles with that. You can buy besom brooms still, but nowadays the birch is bound onto them with wire. In those days it was bound onto with slivers of wood, and that's what he made those with. This is a broom maker's cleaver. It's made of yew wood, you see, very hard, very fine-grained wood, and it's cut to that design. And then you took a hazel rod, which pretend it's a close pegs one, and you cut a triple slot in the top of it, put it in there, and then you could work that all the way down, right the way down the whole of a 8 or 10 foot hazel rod, and you cut it neatly into 3 thin pieces which were used to wrap round and make the thing. A broom maker's cleaver. Something very mundane. Everybody will have a rough idea what that's for. It was used for hanging up a pig when he was killed, in order he could be bled, in order he could be split into the 2 sides, the bacon side and the pork side. But most of these that you find are straight across like that with 2 hooks and a ring in the middle, because they were used by butchers. But this was a cottage one, and that was made like that so you could hang it over the branch of an apple tree, because the whole process of that was done alongside the back door of the cottage when the pig was killed for home consumption. And these are things that give me a sense of wonderment every time I look at them. Because they were made by the earliest men who ever inhabited Britain. They are tools from the old Stone Age, just after the last Ice Age, or even before perhaps. And I think they've been polished because in the gravel bed where they were, there was water flowing. And we dug them out one time when we were getting some gravel in order to mend a path. And every time I look at them, they fill me with wonderment that the earliest men in Britain, using the only hard material they had, which was capable of work, should have made those. There's what they call a hand axe, which was used for splitting things. And they left them there, and they've been lying in that gravel through all the known parts of British history, until one day we took a barrow out to get ourselves a bit of gravel. Now then, the question of horseshoes, to which I was going to devote myself. Start off with that one because it's very dear to me, that one, because it belonged to a horse. You won't find many horses that need a shoe that size. This belonged to a tremendous young Shire horse called Captain, who was the biggest horse we ever had. We never could get a collar to fit Captain from the man who made the big harness collars. We had to have one specially made for him. But it tells you something else about him, apart from his size, because blacksmiths were very skillful people. They used to watch how a horse walked, and they would set him right. Now, if you look at that side, you can see it's flat, that side. And if you look at that side, you can see it's been lowered. Well, the truth of the matter was that Captain walked a little that way, and this particular blacksmith spotted it, and he just made the shoe that way in order to shift him up and make him walk straight. And this is the one of the sort that was at Laurie's sale. And some of the books and some of the collectors will tell you this is an ox shoe. It is not an ox shoe, because it couldn't be an ox shoe, because an ox has a cloven hoof. And as he walks along, he opens and closes the toes of his foot like that, as he goes along, uphill and downhill and in the mud and so on. And if you put on any sort of shoe that made it impossible for him to do that, he couldn't walk in it. I've seen the true ox shoes. We used to plough them up. They were like two laurel leaves, and there were two shoes on each foot. One went there and one went there, just like two laurel leaves, I think. And he could open and close his foot. And as for this, well, I'm afraid you'll have to come back another time. I'm going to tell you what this is. That's the second try I've had at doing so.